I'm continuing with Zoom and virtual programming. It's a little bit crazy to be out there right now, and we want as many people as possible to enjoy these programs. I had a crazy experience on the road today with a road rage person, so I do not like driving in Houston very much anymore. It scares me. So I'm glad we can all join together virtually and enjoy our amazing presenters. So there's lots of stuff about to happen. Fall migration is underway, hawk migration, hummingbird migration, lots of ways to take opportunities and get out there and photograph. Kathy will talk about that, I'm sure, following her and her husband Gary's articles in the Chronicle is a great way to kind of stay up to date with what's happening in the world of birds and wildlife. This is a great season to be right here in Houston, Texas, in the whole Upper Texas Coast region. So I welcome everybody. I thank you for joining us. I am Houston Audubon's education director. I run our Raptor Education Center, and Kathy and many of you have joined me for Raptor photo shoots. We've got many more coming up. It's a great way to practice what Kathy is going to talk to us all about, because you've got live birds that aren't moving around a whole lot, and you can kind of fine tune your settings in lots of different lighting situations, and practice with perhaps new equipment. So I don't know if Kathy, you'll talk about that, but our Raptor photo shoots are a great way to just, practice and experiment. Lots of new adaptations and not material, but technology coming out with photography. And I'm happy that Kathy can give us a window into the world of mirrorless, which many of us, including myself, have not ventured into, but we're curious. So Kathy Adams Clark is an award-winning photographer, tour leader, and great friend of Houston Audubon. And I'm so happy she's our kickoff speaker for this season. So I'm going to turn it over to Kathy. And if anybody has any questions in terms of how to set up what you're seeing, there's the chat. I'll open up the chat, and you can minimize the bar with everybody on it. You can full screen Kathy's slide. So just let me know if you have any questions. And Kathy, take it away.
Okay, Marianne, everybody can hear me? You got me?
Yes.
Okay, super. I'm going to pause every once in a while, just like I do when I'm regularly teaching, and let you all ask questions. And if you want to, you can go ahead and post in the chat, and then maybe Marianne can kind of monitor that. I can't monitor chat and talk at the same time.
Yeah, I will do that. Yep, okay. Got it.
Good. But every once in a while I'll stop and I'll say, are there any questions? Because it might be when I cover certain sections that you want to be able to ask a question of this. So, and I, first of all, I am going to second what Marianne just said about joining her for the Raptor shoots. This was probably my third time doing it. And it really is a great opportunity, not only learn something about the bird, because she and Trey and Javier are just a wealth of knowledge about the birds, but then it's also a great time just to do some controlled shooting of these beautiful raptors and to get close to them and see them. So next time you get an opportunity to do it, I would really recommend that you go out and join Marianne on one of those raptor shoots, because it is a lot of fun. So what we're going to talk about tonight, or I'm going to talk about tonight, is transitioning to mirrorless, or should you transition to mirrorless? And this is from a nature photography point of view. So not from a portrait photography or anything like that. This is from a nature photography point of view. So to start out with, let's talk about what mirrorless actually is that there is no mirror. to reflect the image into the viewfinder. So mirrorless in a lot of ways is taking us back to the old rangefinder cameras, only we're kind of moving just a little bit further back than even that. So we're going to this place in mirrorless where we actually get to look at the exact picture that we're going to take. So this is a what you see is what you get technology. And that makes it really, really nice, especially for us as nature photographers. It does give you a smaller body, but I need to warn you, and I'll come back to it several times. These cameras are a bit lighter, but they are not a whole lot lighter. So there is a bit of a weight loss in carrying the gear around. The body itself is a bit smaller, so it's not going to take up so much room in the hand. But weight-wise, many of these cameras and lenses end up weighing fairly close to what we had with our digital SLR cameras. But where you're going to really notice this in the smaller body is I find these bodies more ergonomic than I did my digital SLR cameras. So for me, the digital SLR camera was bigger in the hand. And then these mirrorless cameras are a bit more ergonomic. And I'll use an example of, I use my R5 and I have a 100 to 500 millimeter lens. So this is very similar to any of you all who are carrying a Canon camera with a 100 to 400 millimeter lens on it, or a Nikon camera with an 80 to 400. I can sling that R5 with a 100 to 500 over my shoulder using my strap. And I don't find that it carries as much weight or as much drag on my shoulders. So I think that while there's not necessarily a massive amount of weight loss when you get one of these cameras, I think what we get is we just get a little bit better ergonomic feel to it. And so it just doesn't feel as heavy. And it could be that we've got some lighter materials in here, but when I've actually put the cameras on the scales, there's not that much difference in weight that goes into it. So mirrorless, once again, the old or the existing digital SLR cameras, we had an autofocus sensor inside of them. We had an image sensor back on the sensor, and then we had an auto exposure sensor up in the top prism area. And so the light comes in, bounces off a series of mirrors, and then comes out through the viewfinder. In the mirrorless cameras now, the light comes straight through, is blocked by the shutter, and then it goes right to the sensor. So what ends up happening is that we have new technology in the sensors that is your autofocus technology and your auto exposure technology, or your exposure technology. And this is now built into the sensor. So in the Canon sensor, for instance, it calls it a dual pixel sensor. And what's going on in a Canon sensor is that there are several of the pixels that are aligning to make sure that your subject is in focus, or they are monitoring everything to see if your subject's in focus. So you've got your sensor doing a whole lot more work, as opposed to in the digital SLR, where we've got different components who are doing the work. And so your sensor ends up being super important and does a lot of the work that we were getting done by other components in the digital SLR camera. So some of the differences in mirrorless cameras. First of all, they use a lot more battery power. So my D1X, which was the top of the line Canon camera, it had this massive, huge battery in it that cost a ton of money. And I charged that battery maybe every 3 or 4 days when I was out constantly shooting. But on a mirrorless camera, you're going to charge batteries after anywhere from 200 photos to 500 photos, depending on what the battery life is. And so that means that in a simple morning, you might end up going through 2 batteries. Now that's in certain cameras. I also tested the Olympus, and I'll talk about different cameras that I've tested along the way. When I tested the Olympus used batteries even faster than that. So there is technology or there are specs out there to tell you how many shots you've got in your battery. So check that out before you make the change. It's just one of those things that you want to look at. But also in mirrorless cameras, we now have in-body stabilization. So we not only have image stabilization, vibration reduction, depending on what your camera manufacturer calls it, but we also have in-body stabilization. So that means that their body is stabilizing and the lens is stabilizing, which means that we can get anywhere from 5 to 8 stops of stabilization now, as opposed to what we had before. These mirrorless cameras also have a big buffer. Now, I assume you know what your buffer is. So you look through your viewfinder of your digital SLR camera, and over on the right-hand side in the lower corner, there's a number like 12 or 9 or 5 or something like that. And that's how many pictures your camera can save in its internal memory. So if you hold your button down, your shutter button down, and you just fire away like crazy because something beautiful is happening with this egret as it's raising its wings and lowering its wings. If you've ever gotten a busy signal on your camera, then that's because you exhausted not only what the card could read, but you exhausted the buffer also. And so 9 to 12 pictures was standard in the buffer on a digital SLR camera, where now we can have up to 77 pictures in your buffer. So this means the likelihood, if we have a good card in there, of us hitting the busy signal when we hold down the button is a lot less likely. So if you've ever found that you're hitting the busy signal when you're holding down, or you're getting the busy signal when you hold down the button, number one, that's usually because of the card that your camera is using. But if you have a good card, then it could be how many pictures are actually held in buffer. And so that buffer becomes kind of nice. And it wasn't until I was photographing hummingbirds 2 weeks ago in the Davis Mountains out in West Texas that I finally hit the buffer busy signal on my R5. And that's because I just held the button down because it stayed in focus. And so what the heck, just photograph till it stops. Well, it finally said busy. So no telling how many pictures I took before it finally hit the busy signal. So that's a really good thing with these new cameras. The electronic viewfinder also is something that I found fascinating and have grown to really like and have grown to use a lot. So the picture that you see over on the right-hand side of the screen right now is just a cell phone picture looking inside my viewfinder. And when you look inside the viewfinder, you can, well, excuse me, when you look on the back of your camera and you pull up, say, menus, then if you put your eye to the viewfinder, you now see through the viewfinder what you were seeing on your back display panel. So this means if you don't want to take your eye down, or bright sunlight, or you don't have your reading glasses or whatever, and you want to make all your changes without even taking your eye off the viewfinder, you can look through the viewfinder, punch the menu button, start sorting through your menus, make your menu changes that you want, and then you never even had to take your eye off the viewfinder. That's a good thing. If action's happening, James has got those pictures of those blue angels behind him. If you've got action like that and you suddenly need to make a change, you can do all that now without having to take your eye off the viewfinder. So you can just keep that camera right up to your face and make all the menu adjustments that you need to. But then also, this is a picture of the back of my camera up on the top left. If you're looking at the picture on the back of your camera, and I know all of you all have done this, you blow it up on the back of your camera to see if it was sharp. And the middle picture is what is a cell phone grab of what it looks like through my viewfinder. So you can see that same picture right through the viewfinder. This isn't the actual picture the camera is taking. This is one I've already photographed of a Lucifer's hummingbird. And then push the magnifying glass to blow it up to see if it's sharp. And you can do that right through the viewfinder as well. So this is one more opportunity to not have to take your eye off the viewfinder in the event that you're in the middle of something shooting. But I also don't know of how many times over the last 20 years that I've been using digital SLR cameras that I've wanted to look at the picture on the back of the camera and the sun's been too bright, or the glare is too bright, or I don't have my reading glasses or whatever. And it's nice because now you just put your eye up to the viewfinder, pull that picture up, push the magnifying glass. And if you notice on the back of my R5, the magnifying glass is just right above where I pull up my picture. And then I can magnify it, even move the picture around through the viewfinder, and I can see whether I got my shot or not, or whether I've got a clear shot or not, or a clean shot or not. So I think this is a really neat feature. It is also very nice when I want to show a picture to somebody on the back of my camera. And so many people, not photographers, can't look at a picture on the back of the camera. So now I can just tell them, put your eye up to the viewfinder and just look at it through the viewfinder. And I always get this gasp from people that, oh, is that the picture you just took? Yeah, that's the picture I just took. Because now you can see it a lot better right through that darkened viewfinder. So I think this is a really, really neat feature, and a real plus on these mirrorless cameras. So the similarities to digital SLR cameras, though, I have to tell you, it's still a camera. This mirrorless is still a camera. So it still has your f-stop and your shutter speed and your light meter and all the other things that go along with it. And the similarities between them, mirrorless and digital SLR, I think there's more similarities than there are differences, provided you're staying in the same system. So if you were a Nikon user and you switched over to the Z Nikon, then I think you're going to see a whole lot of similarities. If you're a Canon user and you switched over to the R, then I think you're going to see a lot of similarities. But when it all boils down to it, these cameras are still very, very much like the digital SLRs in what they're producing and where their features are, for instance. And just to give you an example of that, or excuse me, not getting ahead of myself. So to answer the question, are your digital SLRs dinosaurs? I'm not quite prepared to tell you this is a dinosaur technology. Things are rapidly changing though. You know, we went from typewriters. Some of you all might even remember a manual typewriter. When you took your typing class in high school the first time, and then we went to electric typewriters, and then we went to word processors, and we sort of never looked back. And we went from prints to slides to digital, and we never looked back. And we went from manual focus to autofocus, and we never looked back. So I think that's where we are in a real major technological shift right now in terms of cameras. But is a digital SLR a dinosaur? I'm not quite ready to say it's a dinosaur. The picture that you see of me when my hair was long, I'm still wearing those same earrings, by the way. So, you know, it's not totally dinosaur. And I still use that flash. So I'm not saying that it's totally dinosaur, but the lens and the camera have gone on to new owners somewhere that I hope are using them. So I'm not really ready to say these are dinosaurs, but I am saying that we've got some new technology on the horizon and a lot of new things coming up on the horizon. So why is the mirrorless market growing so much? And it's because I think that we have so many people coming to photography from their cell phones. that Maasai warrior over there on the far left isn't totally devoid of technology. He's got his cell phone hidden underneath his clothes, and he still gets his cell phone signal somewhere out there where he's herding his goats. My husband in the second photo from the left, you know, he's using his iPhone for all kinds of photography, and he doesn't use a point and shoot anymore. So whether people are old or even like that young guy over on the far right in the photograph in Peru, they're familiar with the cell phone as a camera. And so I think that's why we're seeing so many young people going into mirrorless cameras immediately, as opposed to going to a digital SLR. They're used to that cell phone technology, and this mirrorless is much like cell phone technology in many ways. So I think that's why we're seeing more people going into this and going into it now. So it is a growing market. So why my transition? For me, it was new technology. Many of you have taken my classes when we used to teach face-to-face. I've been teaching photography classes now for 27 years, back with the old Leisure Learning, and then I've taught through Houston Community and Lone Star College and all kinds of places. And, you know, so I've taught photography for all of these years. And I never wanted to get to the point where students were bringing in cameras that I didn't know how to use, because that's what they were coming for, was to help me teach them how to use a camera. So I felt pressure to know how to use these mirrorless cameras. And so it was this new technology that I felt some pressure. I originally started exploring this when Canon came out with the M mirrorless, very, very small type of camera, and was impressed with that. But then also when I started realizing the new lenses that were coming out, so to go from a 100 to 400 millimeter lens to a 100 to 500 millimeter lens, that's pretty cool technology. Sony had its 200 to 600 millimeter lens. That's pretty cool technology to be able to handhold that. And so it was this idea of these newer lenses coming out and wanting to be able to embrace those newer lenses. And then also I was reading a lot about the new communication between the body and the lens. And would this speed up autofocus? And would this speed up some other things that we needed for bird photography? And a lot of my change was just simple curiosity. There was a new technology out there. As a teacher, I felt like I needed to have it. And then it was kind of nice too to have some vendors, and you know, who, if I could call them and say, can you send me this camera and let me test it and look at it? That was kind of nice, because it gave me a chance to put my hands on some equipment for a month at a time. So my transition was trying to stay up to date with new technology as a teacher, but then also a curiosity about this new technology. And what really sold me was the first time that I got my hands on a Canon R. To me, it just felt like a baby Canon camera. It was very familiar, and it just felt like home. So when I put that in my hands was when I realized, oh, these are even going to feel the same. So that's when it became kind of interesting to see. And then as the lenses are coming out, then it's becoming really interesting technology.
Hey, Kathy.
Yeah.
Quick question.
Sure.
Because you are on the forefront. I'm just wondering how many people you interact with use the Wi-Fi to cell phone download experience with cameras, you know, I forget what they call it on Nikon. Yeah. And if that's a player with the mirrorless, and if that's a driving force with the young people coming up using cameras, that they want to be able to use that camera, but then wirelessly download it instantly to their iPhone or
their phone. Yeah.
Anyway,
I'm just or their iPad.
if
And
you've had experience with that.
And I think that that is for those people who want to use it that way. I shoot too much and I'm in locations where there's no Wi-Fi and I just don't want to be slowed down by that. I do have friends that have it on all the time and they're constantly just letting it, just letting it do. Personally, I just am not in love enough with my cell phone and with posting in the field to want to do that. But yes, the technology's in all of them so that you can do it. And, if you think about it, even as a studio photographer, this is great because the work is just immediately being shot right to the desktop so that it can then be worked on and it can be looked at by other people. So I think it is a really neat technology. I just don't want to be burdened with it right now. I might have to eat those words next year, but right now I just don't want to be burdened with it. Other question while we're here?
No, I was troubled with that. So yeah, that's great.
Yeah. So, there's a lot of players on this market right now, a lot of players in this market. So Fuji, Lumix, which is the Panasonic line, the Olympus down on the bottom, Canon, Sony, Nikon. There are a lot of players out there. And each one of these camera manufacturers is offering something new and different. Fuji, Sony, and Olympus don't have that digital SLR market. So they're really banking on everything on this mirrorless market. So Fuji, Olympus, and Sony, if you'll notice, are coming out with a lot of whiz-bang features. And those whiz-bang features are to drive people to their markets. Panasonic Lumix, Lumix has been a steady, tried and true in this industry for a long time with the small point and shoot cameras, the little one-piece units that were really, really popular for a while with birders who also were carrying a camera. And then now that Nikon and Canon are firmly in this market, I think that we've got a lot of the tried and true old school technology from the Canons and the Nikons, but yet we've also got, the Fujis and the Olympus and the Panasonics and the Sonys. Sony's given everybody a run for their money because Sony has really been working on this autofocus technology for these years that Nikon and Canon were lagging out of the mirrorless market. And that's what Sony was working on, all this autofocus technology. And so Sony's stolen a whole lot of Nikon and Canon photographers. They almost got me because I was just tired of waiting for Canon to come out with the R. And so I was a week away from ordering everything from Sony when I finally got my hands on my R camera. So Sony's really making a run for it. And they're coming up with some cool technology. So each one of the camera manufacturers is coming up with interesting and innovative things because now they're having to fight for that market share. But what's interesting about this, if you're a Canon user, you're going to find the Canon R has very similar feel. You're going to find that the Canon R gives you the menus where you want them, the way you want them, in your old familiar way of looking at it. You Nikon users, exactly the same thing. And so any of you all who've already switched to the Z technology have probably noticed this. Nikon users, if you haven't switched yet, then if you look over at the back of the Z camera, you'll see that, okay, controls look just like, what you're used to them looking like. Everything's placed just where you're used to it. And I think it's that beautiful familiarity that is going to make this change a lot more comfortable for a large number of people in the market, because you put it in your hands and you can already find Nikon users where all of your buttons and your switches are. So it's just got that familiarity to it. When you go over to Sony, on the other hand, hasn't had a digital SLR in a long time. And so Sony has developed its own technology, and not technology, I'm sorry, its own place where it puts all of its controls. I've heard several people who've switched over to Sony say that the only thing that irritates them about Sony is where the controls are placed, because it's not in the traditional place that they're used to it being if they left Nikon or if they left Canon. So there is a learning curve, a much vaster learning curve, because the menus are not exactly the same and the controls are not in exactly the same places. If you switch from Nikon or Canon and you go to Sony or you go to Olympus, you also not only have controls that are in different spots, but you have words that are different. So I tried an Olympus for a month, and Olympus was very nice and trying to get me to switch over and become an Olympus photographer. And they sent me a box of equipment of everything that I wanted. I just went through the checklist and checked it off, and they sent it all to me. And what I found irritating was that all of the controls on the Olympus were not intuitive to me. And I'm used to being able to pick up a camera in class, and no matter whose camera it is, and be able to immediately use it. And the Olympus, I found, did not do that. Now, once I got used to it and read the manual and learned what they called things, then it became a little bit more what I would call intuitive. But it still is, the Sonys and the Olympus are going to use different terms that Canon and Nikon may not use for different camera technologies, or camera functions, let's put it that way, not technologies. But otherwise, it's the same thing. So some considerations when you're switching, or if you're thinking about switching and you're thinking about making this move, is that your flashes for your Canon are going to switch to your Canon R. Your flashes for your Nikon are going to go over on your Nikon Z. But if you switch from Canon to Sony or Nikon to Fuji, your flashes aren't going to work. So you're going to end up buying new flashes as well. Same thing with shutter releases. So if you've got some shutter releases in your bag right now and you're a Canon user, those shutter releases are probably going to work on your R or on your R5 or your R6. They're the same thing if you were a Nikon. But then if you're moving from Nikon or Canon and you're going into Fuji or Sony or Olympus, you're going to have to get you new shutter releases. Some of the new lenses are coming out in different filter sizes. Nikon and Canon for years, all their professional lenses were 77mm filter size. It was just standard. Well, doesn't hold true anymore. And Canon and Nikon and everybody else are producing lenses now that are not in those old familiar filter sizes. So that means some filters might have to be rebought. And if you bought a $250 nice polarizing filter and it doesn't fit any of your new lenses, then you're going to have to make a new purchase. And then also check lens availability. So I traditionally use the long lenses and then super wide angle lenses for landscape photography. And it was nice for me with Canon because they came out with the 100 to 500 almost first. That was almost their first RF lens. And then they came out with the 24 to 105, which was my common lens to use. And then the 16 to 35, which was my second most common lens to use. So for me, it was easy to make a Canon switch because they had the three lenses that I used on a daily basis. And so some of the manufacturers haven't come out with certain lenses. And I think it really, you need to do that research to see whether they've got the lenses that you're looking for. Also the quality of the electronic viewfinder, and you are only going to find this once you've tested the camera. The Olympus drove me crazy. Now this was 2 years ago when I tested it because it flickered black every time I took a picture. So there was that microsecond when through the viewfinder, I got a solid black and couldn't see where the bird was. So that just drove me absolutely nuts. It's not noticeable in my Rs. And then supposedly in the new R3, it's not there at all. James, I'm looking at you right now on my screen. If you can unmute on your Nikon Z, do you get an electronic flicker?
It's there, but it's not as noticeable. It, a few milliseconds. It's not, it's there, but it's not noticeable.
And have you kind of gotten to where you don't pay attention to it anymore?
That's true. Yes.
Yeah. And so I think after a while you kind of just get used to this, that it doesn't happen anymore. But it is something that's there, and you're not going to know this until you test the camera. That's why I think you need to rent this or use your friends to see whether this is going to bother you or not. Thanks, James. I appreciate that input. That helps me out.
Mm-hmm.
Of all the mirrorless cameras, the Nikon is the one I haven't had a chance to test for any length of time. So I still have a lot of questions about that camera. And then you're going to have to buy new cards, or you might have to buy new cards depending on what you have right now. So Sony is using the CF Express, but Sony is using a smaller size CF Express. Nikon and Canon are using the CF Express Type B. It's a little bit bigger card. It's not a teeny weeny card. It's a fairly nice size card. It doesn't slip out of your fingers or anything like that. And then for some of you all who had a QXD card, that can now be used on the Z technology as well with a firmware update. So you might not have to chunk that card completely. And then you still can use your SD cards on these cameras. I made a rookie mistake in the early days, and I left home without a card in my camera. And the only place to buy a card was at a convenience store in Winnie. Everybody knows where Winnie, Texas is. And the only cards that they had were SD cards. And I had my R, so I just thought, heaven forbid, that SD card will never fit in my R. And it worked just fine. I shot all day long with no problems whatsoever. And so these cameras will still use your SD cards. But most of them, they're working better if you're using the CF Express cards, because then that has the really fine read-write speeds. And you notice even on the one that I showed you an example of, that the megabytes per second read and write is just huge right now. And so, these are huge files, but at the same time, these cards are keeping up. So this does mean that you're going to have to buy some cards. Does this mean you've got to buy 12 cards or 15 cards? No, I don't think so. I have one CF Express card and I have one SD card. So I have 2 cards, and between the 2 cameras, I have 3 cards. And so far, I haven't ever found a need to have more cards than that. And I just download when, at midday and that type of stuff. So you are going to have to buy some new cards with these, or might have to buy some new cards with these. So what do I miss about my digital SLR? I miss the familiarity. It's been a year now, almost a year and a half, that I've been shooting with the mirrorless cameras. And sometimes, especially in those first 4 or 5 months, I missed the familiarity of just being able to pick up my camera and shoot and have it do what I wanted it to do. Now I'm perfectly fine. But there are times when I miss the familiarity of that digital SLR. I do miss the reliability of it. I have not had any trouble so far with my Canon cameras, but my friend Mari Reed tells me that she's having some structural issues with her Sony camera. She's just having things that fall off. But so far, I'm not having any trouble whatsoever. I haven't had anything that has fallen off or anything that is dinged off. And by the way, I cannot blame my mistakes anymore. I didn't blame my digital SLR for my mistakes. It was always operator error, and it was always my fault. And now sometimes with the mirrorless, I wonder whether it's the mirrorless or is it me? And I'm starting to learn how to take more responsibility for the shots I miss and not blame everything on the camera and just chalk it up to operator error. Or with photographers, let's face it, we just miss some shots, and we only remember the shots we miss. We don't remember the shots that we get. We always remember the things we didn't miss. But do I miss my digital SLRs after this year and a half? I'm getting to the point where I can tell you, no, I don't miss my digital SLRs. So we'll see as it goes along. What do I love? This is the one, this is like my embrace this technology completely. And that is the ability to see my picture through the viewfinder when I overexpose or underexpose. So when we were at the raptor shoot the other day, we had some spotty sunlight coming through the forest. And you all know how this is when we're a photographer and we're shooting a bird with white feathers or something like that, and there's sunlight on it, but shadow in another area, likelihood we're going to blow those white feathers. But now, like in this parrot on the top, that was a silhouette to the birders with me looking through their binoculars. And that was a silhouette to me through the camera. But then I simply overexposed until the lighting was right. And then I could say this was a white-fronted parrot, and I got my shot. So we're not having to do that overexposure later on in Lightroom or Photoshop, which introduces more noise. We can do that overexposure or that underexposure right there in the camera. Same thing with this pale-billed woodpecker. It's up against that bright sunlight. It's in the shade. But in Costa Rica, I could simply overexpose. Yes, I might be blowing the sky, but I'm going to get the picture of my pale-billed woodpecker. So I absolutely love the ability to overexpose or underexpose right through the viewfinder. And in the tropics, this is just proven to me to be invaluable, so that I know whether I'm getting the proper exposure or not. So I'm not having to get the pictures back on the computer and then realize that I blew the highlights. If I was paying attention in the field, I know whether I blew the highlights or not, because I can see it right through the viewfinder.
Hey, Kathy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Two questions.
Sure.
Sorry, I have to take care of my dogs. Are you using EF lenses on the R system? Any differences in pic quality, and are the sensors typically full size?
Okay, so let me talk about lenses at another point. Okay.
Okay, perfect.
And right now on both of the Canons, the sensors are full size. So the R6 and the R5, they're full size. On your Olympus, that's a micro 4/3, meaning that it is 4/3 is small. So it's a smaller, much smaller sensor. And I also switched to full frame or full sensor cameras 5-6 years ago. And once I got away from the crop sensor cameras, I never thought about it again. And the nice thing about how big the sensors are, the sensor is in the R5, is that if I need to crop, I've got more than enough pixels to crop. So neither one of the Canon cameras are crop sensors, but that is something that you want to look at in whichever camera you decide to switch to, if you decide to switch. And then the other thing that I really, really love is this exposure range. So Joe's been with me to Costa Rica. Any of you other ones who've gone to shoot hummingbirds with me in Costa Rica, you know that we got to put our flash on all the time, because the only way we're going to get the sparkle off of the hummingbird is to put your flash on. What's really amazing is that with these mirrorless cameras, is I'm not feeling like I've got to put the flash on as much as I used to with a digital SLR camera. So my flash just isn't getting used that much. And especially on hummingbirds, it's not getting used that much. And where I used to feel, especially in the tropics, that we always had to have our flash on for our hummingbirds, I'm just finding that once we get these pictures into the computer and do a little shadow opening and add a little texture, that it's giving me pretty much the glistening that I would have gotten if I would have used my flash. And so that is a really neat thing. I'm also finding that there's so much dynamic range in these photographs now, as well as new technology from Adobe Lightroom Photoshop, that I'm not doing HDR as much either. So I'm able to take the picture in one shot, make sure that my highlights aren't blown, and then I'm able to pull my shadows out. So I'm just not using HDR as much as I used to, and am not looking back on that at all. So this is not only talking about the Canon technology, but this is talking about all these other mirrorless. So I've tried it with Sony's, I've tried it again with the Canon and with the Olympus. And with the Sony, I didn't find that we needed to use flash on hummingbirds as much either. It followed the hummingbirds really well with the autofocus, and it was just nice to not be tethered to that flash on the top of the camera to add that extra weight. So I think that that's a pretty neat thing going on with these mirrorless cameras as well. So we're seeing some changes in the technology that means we might be able to shoot in a slightly different way than what we used to be able to do before. So this is an Amazon Kingfisher from the Caño Negro up in down in Costa Rica. We'll go there this year on the November trip. This Amazon Kingfisher, we're in a boat deep in the forest going through the mangroves, and this Amazon Kingfisher is digging his hole, his burrow for his female, and he's got that mud all over his beak. He's on this branch, and there's just that dappled sunlight coming through that, you know, it is just the horror of all of us photographers, because we're going to blow those highlights. But it was so nice to be able to look through the viewfinder and figure out how much I needed to underexpose without having to take the picture, look on the back of the camera, look at the histogram, take the picture again, look on the histogram, take the picture, look on the histogram again. I could just see whether I was blowing my highlights or not. And that was nice because I didn't have to take my eye off the viewfinder and didn't have to lose focus on the bird. So this ability to overexpose and underexpose right in the camera and see it is a real game changer when it comes to nature photography. And then also with these cameras, we have electronic shutters versus mechanical shutters.
Hey, Kathy.
Yes.
Quick question.
Sure.
So I have reading glasses, distance glasses, progressives, the whole gamut.
Yeah.
And it's awful.
Yes.
With using binoculars and camera. So with the mirrorless, I mean, are you, like, if I have to have my reading glasses on to look at the back of my DSLR?
Uh-huh. And I do too. And that's why now I'm just looking through the viewfinder.
So you're just strictly looking through the viewfinder for everything.
Almost everything now. Yeah, reflex still makes me look on the back. But I've gotten to where now I'm, you know, your diopter, of course, is set on this on the top of your digital SLR, just like it is on your mirrorless. But I'm just finding I'm looking at more stuff through the viewfinder because then I don't have to go looking for my reading glasses.
Well, Kathy, this is Joe. I wear trifocals.
Yeah.
And for my Nikon, I set the diopters, but I still have to use the far distance lens of my glasses to look through the viewfinder.
Yeah.
Now, when I look at the back of the camera, you know, then I either use the reading component or the trifocal one.
Mm-hmm.
But so what would I do if I had a mirrorless camera? Do I just not have to wear glasses at all, or what?
No, you're still going to wear your glasses. You know,
Okay.
that's all there is to it. But I suspect what's going to happen is you're going to kind of get used to, it's going to be easier for you just to continue to look on the back, or it's going to be easier for you to maybe look through that wherever. And I think you'll figure it out. But I suspect that you're going to be able to still look through the viewfinder if you want to blow this picture up and, you know, see whether it's sharp or
Okay.
not.
So with these well, they're called what?
Electronic viewfinders.
Electronic viewfinders.
Yeah.
People with glasses still, they can still see well enough to use them properly.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's been one of my holdbacks.
Yep.
And I have another question, and maybe you'll address this later, but for macro work, especially where you're doing one-to-one, Are there any advantages you found with the mirrorless camera for, let's say, depth of field preview, trying to figure out what's the right f-stop to use for depth of field purposes, things like that?
So you're seeing your depth of field.
Can you see it? Can you see a
Uh-huh.
difference if you change the aperture?
Yeah. And then there's also a really cool feature called focus peaking, and you can see it through the viewfinder or on the back of the camera. And it's where you want the places that are in focus. You can set them to be either yellow or red or blue. So when you're rotating your focus ring on a macro subject, you can actually watch where your focus is going.
Oh,
Very cool. Yeah.
I did not know that.
Yeah, very cool. So there's, you know, there's bells and whistles in these things that are just darn cool. Yeah.
So it
So,
seems,
yes.
it seems to me like you have to learn that while you're looking through the viewfinder, your thumbs are hitting switches that otherwise you would be looking at on the back of your display. So it's like you have to learn to drive. Like you just learn where all the buttons are.
Yeah.
Does that
Yeah.
make sense? Yeah,
And whether you're looking at them or not, you have to kind of know where they are. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
And then we have the electronic shutter versus the mechanical shutter. So the mechanical shutter is the traditional, you know, shutter that's moving across. But then there's a electronic shutter also that's even quieter than what Joe heard the other day, because you don't hear it at all. And this is where we can shoot 20 frames a second, or we can shoot 12 frames a second. And so for something like on a hummingbird, when it's locked on to focus and you see that the camera has got this hummingbird in focus, there's all kinds of little red dots that show up when it's locked on to focus. And if you're on electronic shutter, then this is where you just hold the button down, and it's your job now to stay on that hummingbird because the camera's got it. But then this also means you're now getting 20 frames per second versus 12 frames per second. So you're going through a heck of a lot of photos if they're bad, and then a heck of a lot of good photos if they're good. So it gives us this ability to shoot faster. We don't always want to do this, but it gives us this ability to shoot faster just in case we want to.
Okay, can you change that from 20 to a lower number if you don't want 20?
You probably can, you know, go into a menu item or something like that.
Okay.
Yeah, you probably can. You probably can. But heck, why would you want to not shoot 20 frames per second? You know? Yeah. So it's another cool thing. And then the ISO. Now, newer and newer technology, and many of you have already caught on to this. Each new iteration in digital SLR cameras gave us a better high ISO. My 5D Mark IV had better high ISO than my 5D. My 5D Mark IV had better high ISO than the 7D Mark II. You know, each time we move into these more advanced cameras, we just get better ISO technology. So right now with my mirrorless, I can shoot at 2000 ISO without even thinking about it. It's not the best place to shoot. I need to lower that, but sometimes I get lazy and I forget about it. So this is a gray-necked wood rail down in Costa Rica. You know, he's hunting around in the jungle, and he's in the shade. And this is a 2,000th of a second shutter speed handheld. And so, you know, and I haven't done anything to it. So there's no noise reduction or anything like that. And so these higher ISOs are good. Once again, you've got to test the camera to see whether this holds true or not. I can go higher than this, but the reality is, of course, the worse the light, the higher the ISO, the worse everything looks like. But then we have all these ISO noise reduction softwares out there. So it's pretty neat. So anyway, 2000 ISO is pretty acceptable for the birds. For my Canons, my night photography has not suffered at all. And I can't say the same thing is true on the Olympus and the Sonys that I have tested, or the Fujis. With my Canon, I can see the stars, I can focus. The view through the viewfinder is remarkably clear at night, especially showing me where the stars are. I did not find that with the Olympus at all. And with Sony, it kind of drives me crazy. So if you're into night photography and you really want to do a lot of night photography, then this is one, before you make a switch to a certain camera, I would test it to make sure. Don't take anybody's word for it. So for me, doing star trails, it still does, you know, magnificent star trails. This is a blended image, not an in-camera image. This is a blended image. So for me, the Canon R5 and R6 still do just exactly what I would have gotten with my Canon R5. So I'm really happy with that. So you need to make sure that you test what you shoot with the camera system that you might think about switching if you're going to switch. Don't take anybody's word for it. I was trying to help somebody with a Sony and a very nice Sony on top of that do some night photography, and I could not get his photos to look good, even though he was up in Canada in a very dark location. And yes, there are a million YouTube videos, and there are Sony users who run the camera through 45 minutes of processing to get a really nice night shot. But I think 45 minutes of processing to get a night shot is ridiculous. It shouldn't require that. So yes, it was possible, but it just wasn't as easy as I could do with the Canons and the Nikons. So what do I hate still? And I'm hoping that maybe the next generation camera, I don't have these same complaints. If I see a bird soaring overhead, turkey vulture, black vulture, it is really hard for me to get that bird in focus. I can eventually, but it's not as easy as it was with my Canon 5D Mark IV, and it is not as easy as it was with my D1X. I'm used to just pointing the camera overhead in the blue sky and that camera finding the bird. And I don't find that my R5 and my R6 do that as well. I also find that my R5 and my R6 do not follow a bird as well. I'm saying as well. So 90% on a 100% scale when the bird is flying directly across. So when the bird's flying directly across, I find it harder to keep the bird in focus. But I'm working on this, and I'm finding that as my skills are becoming better working with these mirrorless, I'm getting better. What I do like is when the bird is coming directly at me, I can lock onto it and I can watch that bird come directly at me, and that camera never loses focus. So birds flying directly at me are a whole other story. I have the new 15 to 35 millimeter RF lens for my night sky photography. And when I throw the tripod over my shoulder and walk from location to location at night, the focus slips. And I didn't have that on my old Canon regular lens. And then also what I do hate also, even though I'm not a Sony or an Olympus or a Fuji user, I hate the new words that they have given for traditional photography terms. So where I can say your highlight indicator and you Nikon and Canon users know what I'm talking about, it's not called a highlight indicator in the Sony, Fuji, or Olympus camera manual. They call it something else. And I hate those words. And I know that they have to use those words because they're different corporations, but I sure do hate those other words. And they're still using f-stop and shutter speed and light meter and that type of thing. But I do hate some of the new terminology that's making it harder for us photographers to talk to each other. So some things that I really do like, and I think these bells and whistles are a really, really nice thing, eye tracking. So Sony has this, Canon has this, I suspect Nikon has this. So this is eye tracking. This is really, really good. Focus stacking is nice. In-camera panoramic, not every camera model does this, and not every camera brand does this. In-camera time lapse. Olympus has this really neat feature called Pro Photo Tracking, which is where you focus on the bird because the bird's going to fly off the stick, and you focus and you push your shutter button halfway down, and it takes 20 pictures and then rolls over to another 20 and erases the first 20 and rolls over to another 20. So you can sit there with your finger all the way down on the shutter button, and then when the bird does move, you're sure you got it. And this is a great feature, magnificent feature. And then Olympus also has live composite. So instead of having to do a star trail where we blend the pictures later on, it takes picture after picture after picture in the camera and notices where the light is different in each picture and blends them together inside the camera. That's a cool feature. So there are some really nice bells and whistles in these cameras. Not everybody has everything because that's always been the way it is in photography. I get envious of you Nikon users, and you Nikon users get envious of something that the Canon has, and Canon gets envious of something that the Sony has. That's the way it's always been. So some features that I do find really interesting, and Marianne just mentioned a little bit ago about knowing where the buttons are on your camera now, because you're using a lot more of those buttons with your thumbs and your fingers. I never used to move off of one autofocus point. And now I am constantly moving between all of my different focus mechanisms. So this is the array of focus mechanisms that we have on the Canon cameras. It's very similar to what you see on the other mirrorless. So if I'm raising my camera up to photograph a flying bird overhead, I am also moving my thumbs to move me to the large zone. If I move to the large zone, then I can get that hawk or vulture better in focus when I point it straight overhead in the blue sky or the white sky. So, you know, something like this king vulture, it's much easier for me to get it if I'm on a large section as opposed to one section. And I've always been able to do it on one dot, and it bugs me that I have to change it, but I'm getting really fast at changing it. Something like this turnstone flying up, I'm just sitting there waiting for the wave to hit. And as soon as the wave hits, then I'm just firing like crazy. And then the autofocus is just staying right with the bird. This is the limpkin that ran in the newspaper when Gary wrote about the limpkins here in Houston. And this was just, I was ditzing around, just, waiting for something to happen, and noticed this large bird on the horizon flying toward me. I locked on to autofocus and I followed it all the way in, and halfway in, I realized it was the limpkin. It's a limpkin. And just kept that button halfway down, all the way down, firing all the way in, and it kept focus all the way in. So large zone autofocus works really, really well. Animal eye focus, yeah. This spring, I put this thing through its paces, and this is a game changer. So that little animal eye focus, this is the view on the back of the camera. So both of these pictures that you see are just cell phone shots from the back of my camera. We put that on animal eye focus. It activates an entire viewfinder of focus area. And when it finds the warbler's eye, as long as I can keep the camera on the warbler, this is my skills. As long as I can keep my camera on that warbler, that camera stays on that warbler's eye. And this is really remarkable technology. Absolutely remarkable. I had a lot of fun with this spring. It was a lot of fun. And then, you know, things like this with this perula, it's not even large in the frame and it's moving around. And I just have that animal eye activated right on its eye. And now I can move the camera however I want to keep the composition like I want it. And the autofocus stays on that warbler's eye. So this is a fun thing. Willet walking down the beach, you know, they move their head back and forth. And so that's hard to keep that eye in focus. But once it locks onto the eye, then as long as I can keep the camera on the eye, then the autofocus stays on that eye. So this is a really, really, really neat feature. You know, the egrets and herons moving around at the rookery. You know how hard it is to keep it on the eye. But once it locks in on the eye, then you just see the little light coming on where the eye is. And so you know it's there. This is a picolet, olivaceous picolet. It's a woodpecker about so big in Costa Rica. It's the first time I've ever seen it. And it was going to town, hammering away on this vine, getting grubs out of the vine. I don't see how it could get grubs out of that vine, but it was pulling them right out. And this is just locked onto the eye so that I can just work now on making sure that I've got the camera on the bird. It's really, really nice when it works. So on something like a tanager, super easy to do because it can find the eye. Put that scarlet tanager though in a mulberry bush and the camera's going to have trouble figuring out which one's the eye. And so that's where you've got to kind of move it and nudge it sometimes to get it to go to the eye. And in this photograph of this northern mockingbird eating American beauty berries, it got confused by the American beauty berries and thought the American beauty berries were the eye. And so it left the mockingbird and went to the American beauty berries. So, you know, it's just one of those things we got to be aware of. It's going to try to find the eye where it can. The yellow port on a hummingbird feeder, my Canon thinks that that's an eye. And so I have to move the camera off, kind of whack it around a little bit, get it back on the hummingbird, and then it finds the eye of the hummingbird. But in a hummingbird like this, down in the tropics, you see where the eye is back there. So the hummingbird was sitting upright, looking at me. The camera had the eye in focus, and then the hummingbird bent over to get a drink out of the heliconia, and the camera stayed right with the eye. So that animal eye focus is a really, really nice feature. There's another nice feature in these cameras called focus stacking. And most of the cameras have this, and you can ask it to do this in camera or you can do it later on. And I was shooting with my 500mm lens with the 1.4x extender, the 100 to 500. So I'm shooting at 700mm. I don't have much depth of field on these Sanderlings. And so I just did a focus stack. And the way that Canon does a focus stack, you focus on the closest item to you. So like the tail of the Sanderling right here, you tell it ahead of time, I want to do 10 photos and I want to have this much space between each photo. So you get that all set and then you punch the button once and it takes 10 photos. So you don't even have to take 10 photos. You just punch the button once and it takes 10 and it moves the focus point through there. So for focus stacking and macro photography, and I'm finding it fun to focus stack on birds now. I did have to fix this guy's head right here. So that's why it's nice not to have the focus stacking in camera, but some people like to do the focus stacking in camera versus later on. This is focus stacking of a little blue jean tree, poison dart frog, once again, about 1 inch long in Costa Rica. It's a focus stack. And this is just a goofy focus stack, but there was a bee in front of me and I got it in focus. And so I just held it and, you know, till I took 20 or 30 shots of it. And then I focus stacked it. So it's the same bee, but then I just focus stacked it. So, you know, stupid stuff, goofy stuff, but that focus stacking is really, really nice. And then Marianne, you asked me about adapters because everybody's got an adapter now. And you can use an adapter on these cameras until you get enough money and buy the new lenses or whatever. But what I do want to keep in at the forefront of your mind is that these new sensors are different than our old sensors in our digital SLRs. They are more sensitive. So if you are putting an adapter on your new mirrorless, and then you're putting your 20-year-old lens on it, that sensor is going to notice every flaw in your lens. And you'll start seeing the flaws in your lenses that you never saw before. So we are dealing now with new electronics, new glass, new autofocus. And so if you have to use an adapter, I don't think there's anything wrong with using an adapter, but just be aware that the whole technology is new. For instance, on one of the Canon lenses, there's a ring right up at the very tip of the end of the lens. And I could program that to change my f-stop if I wanted to. So there's things on the lenses that will do things that we couldn't do before. So the mirrorless sensors are going to show all the flaws in your lenses, any scratches you might have, that type of stuff. But then it also might, if you're using an adapter, it might slow autofocus. Now, I have a friend named Richard Day. I've got a video coming out with him in a couple of weeks talking about mirrorless technology. And Richard is shooting with the adapter for the Canon because this is the best he could do was by the body right now. And then he's using a Sigma 600, 60 to 600. And he is just posting some amazing birds in flight and butterflies in flight shots. And he says he probably won't buy the Canon 100 to 500 because he's so in love with the Sigma 60 to 600 and the Canon adapter. So I think the adapter is a way to go, and it could be a bridge until you're able to get the newer lenses or until the newer lenses come out. Or it might turn out that you're like my friend Richard Day and you find that the adapter is perfectly fine and you're not going to invest in new lenses. So I think that's, once again, where renting these equipment or borrowing your friend's equipment is a nice thing to see whether this stuff really works the way it's supposed to. So are you making this change to save weight? You might as well get that out of your brain, because we're not saving that much weight. As I said, the cameras have a better ergonomic feel to them and the cameras are a little lighter, but my camera bag now still is full of stuff. And my camera bag is still heavy, probably a couple of ounces, not as heavy as it used to be. But it's not so much a weight issue as it is new technology. Now, that said, though, Olympus is micro four thirds. And so Olympus 300 millimeter lens is really equal to a 600 millimeter lens. So, you know, you're just not, if you did Olympus, you do have some weight savings, but even when I tested, it wasn't that much. If you want to know some more, I have a video on YouTube that I did with Mari Reed. She's a friend of mine who does outstanding bird photography, and it's a transitioning to mirrorless, the thoughts from two female bird photographers. And if you do go watch it, please give a thumbs up and then push the subscribe button if you want to know the next time that I post a YouTube video. Do y'all know why you're supposed to punch the thumbs up button on a YouTube video?
No.
No?
No.
Anybody? So if you don't punch that thumbs up button, whether this is your Spanish video or your dog washing video or your how to cook a recipe video, if you don't push that thumbs up, the algorithm doesn't think that you like the video. And if you don't push the subscribe button, which all the young people know how to do, but none of us gray-haired people know how to do it. If you don't push the subscribe button, then once again, the algorithm for YouTube does not think that that person is very popular. So if you've got gray hair, you need to get used to pushing the subscribe button and push the like button, because that's the way that people on YouTube move higher up into the rankings. So just a little
Hey.
FYI there.
Hey Kathy,
Yeah.
so if it's not weight, what is your biggest takeaway from switching to mirrorless? Like what really sold you?
So if it's not weight, it's the ergonomics, because it does ergonomically feel better. And I find that I can just carry it better. And it doesn't weight me down as much as my other one did. But it's also the new technology that they're giving, that animal eye, that ability to focus stack, you know, being able to photograph those red-eyed tree frogs in Costa Rica and do a focus stack without even having to think about it. This is good stuff. So we've got some really nice technology, and realize we're young in this technology. We're 3-4 years into this. So no telling what they're going to give us as time goes on. So I think it's this technology innovation. I will warn you though, these pictures are big. And we take a lot of them now, more than we did with digital SLR. We take a lot of them now. And I did have to upgrade my Mac computer.
So, Kathy, what about the lenses? I'm assuming the lenses may have better image quality.
Correct.
But I know some of them do not have as wide of apertures as some of the older DSLR lenses. Is that good, bad, or indifferent?
And we don't need what we used to call fast lenses. We don't need the 2.8 and the 1.4s and the 4s, because we needed those before because we didn't have ISO. And the only way to get more light was to get us a lower aperture, which means we were sacrificing our depth of field. And we just need to get rid of this concept of fast lenses because we don't need it anymore. We have an alternative, and that alternative is ISO. So they're not even coming out with the 1.4 lens or the 2.8 lens. And then we're also getting away from the weight. I've sold my 500 completely, and I'm not buying another 500 right now, I hope anyway. I'm getting what I need with my 1-500 with a 1.4x extender, and I am not missing my 500. I'm not missing that weight of that 500. So we're seeing also. So for instance, that Nike, those two Canon lenses, the 600 and the 800, are both at f11 and f whatever. My 1-500 is, I'm shooting at an f10 now. And f10 is exactly what I needed. That Hummingbird was f10. So for that much,
I was using the 300. Yeah, about a week ago, I was using a 300 f2.8, and Kathy was using the camera and lens that she's pictured here. And first of all, she wasn't using a monopod, and I was still using a monopod.
Mm-hmm.
So she got at least twice as many good shots than I got because she had less gear to fool around with. And her depth of field turned out probably to be better
Mm-hmm.
because I was shooting too wide and I don't have enough depth of field on, I'd say 50% of the raptors I took. I will admit my boo-boos.
Correct. I thought about you often because I was focused on the eye. And no matter where that raptor moved its head, I was focused on the eye. And then I was focused at f10. And luckily we had big distances behind us for each one of those birds. And so my background is perfectly fine. Yeah.
And think of the weight savings, because that
Yes.
300 f2.8, that's a heavy lens. That's 6 to 8 pounds, somewhere right in there.
Very heavy. And flying now is easier because we're just not trying to carry those big lenses. Okay, other people, questions? Chime in. Come on, unmute. You've got questions.
Oh, yeah, I had a question. How do you rate the performance of the extender? I have the same setup as you do. I love it. I also had a 500 prime I was shooting with for a long time, and I don't miss the weight. And I'm
Yeah.
enjoying having the flexibility of shooting a little bit of semi macro with the 100. But I have not invested in the extender at this point. I was going to see if you feel like it's useful and how well it performs as far as the image quality and acquiring focus.
I notice no problems at all in image quality, and I shoot with it all the time. So it's a permanent fixture when the 1:5 is on, except if I need to get a little closer, and then I might take the 100 to 500 off, like when I was doing hummingbirds in the backyard the other day. But I'm using it all the time, and I don't find it slows anything down, and the image quality is perfectly fine.
I've got one question, Kathy, about the electronic shutter versus the mechanical.
Mhm.
Yeah, aside from the frames per second issue, are there reasons to use one over the other or vice versa?
If you were in a church and did not want that shutter sound, so you would use your electronic, because your electronic doesn't make any noise. So, if you were in a very quiet environment and you didn't want anybody to know you were taking pictures.
Because I've got one friend of mine has switched to Sony from Nikon, and he just said, I only use the electronic shutter. There's no reason for him. He said there's no reason for him to use the mechanical, and I never had a chance to ask him any follow-up.
Yeah, and I'm on electronic, but then I'm not on the electronic high speed, and so it's electronic first curtain, which is a little bit slower. So, but if I want to go really, really fast, then I go to the other one. Other questions? Marianne, did we get all the questions out chat?
We did. The last one was about the extender. So I think we got, just checking. Yeah, I think John Lum had asked about in Olympus he really likes the electronic bubble levels. He I guess commenting,
Yeah,
keeping the horizon level.
that's good. That's good, because yeah, you've got that, and then I've got it in my Canon too. And then there's also an electronic feature on the back in the menus. You know how you get distortion with the lenses? It'll fix it in the camera as opposed to fixing it later on.
Do you find that with the mirrorless and all the new technology, you're having to do less post-processing, or is that still similar?
Where I'm doing less post-processing is where I overexposed that bird or I underexposed that bird. And, the lighting conditions were bad, and I didn't think to overexpose or underexpose or whatever. I'm just not finding that I'm having to deal with that stuff later on. And I tell you, it really, really is nice when you're looking up in the trees at a bird to be able to know that your overexposure is working, or when the sun is bright and to know that your underexposure is working.
And who knows what will come in the future? It's crazy.
Exactly.
Kathy, given that you probably maybe take more images now that you're in a shoot with mirrorless, have you had to change any of your software you use for culling images or anything like that? Or has it affected any parts of your workflow?
No. I'm just becoming a whole lot more freer with the delete button, because I'm taking so many. And it just gives you the ability also, and I'm sure many of you have found this anyway, it just gives you the ability to play. And maybe it'll work, maybe it won't work. Go ahead and shoot it, see if it works. I think that's kind of a fun thing that we're able to do right now. Any other questions?
Yeah, Kathy, I'm sort of on the other end of this. I bought an R6 a couple weeks ago, and
Yes.
been away from this for a long time. Do you have any recommendations for any YouTube videos? I looked at a couple about how to sort of learn about it.
You can watch my YouTube videos, of course.
Oh, okay.
Yes, yes.
Sounds perfect.
And then also on my blog, I just journaled this the whole time I was doing it. What I liked, what I didn't like, my trial and my errors, frustrations. So there's a year and a half of journaling on my blog. So that's just from my website, Kathy Adams Clark, and you'll find it.
Okay.
And I do have to tell you all also, I did have to send my R5 back to Canon. I kept thinking it was me. I kept thinking it was my problem. I've journaled about this on my blog. And then when I got my R6 and started shooting with my R6, I realized, no, my R5's broken. And I sent my R5 back. And if that ever happens to you, keep the pictures that prove that either your camera did this or your camera did that, because they're going to try and blame it on operator error, of course. But I kept some of the pictures that didn't work, and they were able to fix it, and I've never had a problem with it.
That is really good information. And again, your classes and trips, just getting face to face and working with with the new technology and with your equipment, and come out to a raptor shoot.
Yes.
It's easy. The birds are sitting, they're live, so you have that dynamic, but it's a great way to practice with subjects. We love people coming out with all kinds of different technology and different cameras, and Kathy's got some awesome classes, and hopefully, with crazy COVID, some great trips coming up. We really hope those trips are going to happen, but all of our workshops, all of our classes, online, I really highly recommend them. And we just are so grateful that she can join us tonight and share with us, because the technology is changing so fast, but
it is. And Marianne, one more thing on the plug for the international trips. Gary and I and Strabo Tours make a donation to Houston Audubon for everyone who goes on a trip with us. So Gary and I don't clean beaches, and there's a lot of work days at High Island that we can't take advantage of, but we do make a donation for everybody who attends one of our international trips. And it's a sizable donation on a good year when we didn't have COVID. It's a sizable donation to Houston Audubon. And so we do like you all, Houston Audubon members on the trip. Whether you're an Audubon member or not, by the way, anybody who goes on one of our trips, we make a donation based on head count. And the Costa Rica trip in November has one opening for a woman who wants a roommate. And then the February Costa Rica trip is to a whole new itinerary. Most of you all have never done that one before. And it does have openings on it. And Costa Rica, I know it's going because they got COVID under control in that country. So Costa Rica, it's going. Yeah.
And Kathy, when do you expect to post? You guys go so many places. When should folks be looking for new postings? Because you go to Ireland and Cuba and all those places.
The website's up to date right now through 2022. But then my class schedule right now, because I thought I was going to go to Italy this month, my class schedule doesn't have anything on it. But if I don't go to Italy this month, then classes will show up. So check my website. Often. I'll get back to normal once COVID lets us.
We hope.
Yes.
We hope everyone will.
Then we'll all go back to normal.
What is normal? Nobody knows, but this is great. We live in a very awesome area. Fall migration is underway. Come out to see the martins. If you didn't see Gary and Kathy's article about purple martins, our next watch party is this coming Saturday at the Willowbrook area.
Oh, you
Um,
should go if you haven't been. It's
it's-
good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Thank you.
the other week was the best I've ever seen.
It's like National Geographic. It's amazing. So the Purple Martins in Willowbrook come out, another great experience with photography. And check our website, get in touch with Kathy, Hawkwatch, everything's happening. So no excuses out there. And thank you all for joining us. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much, Kathy.
You are welcome.
My
Yeah.
brain is full as usual.
This
It
was
was-
great, Kathy. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank
thank
you.
Yeah,
you.
thanks, Kathy.
Thank
Thank
you.
Thank
Thank you, Kathy.
Enjoyed it.
This
Thank you,
is stellar.
everybody. Keep safe, and we look forward to seeing everybody next month. I'll be posting more info about Hampa coming up, so more to come, and get out there and shoot.
Hey, good night.
Thanks,
Right.
everybody.
Thank you.
That was great.
Bye.
My
Thank you,
Good.
Kathy.
God.